My name's Rusty Nixon. I've been covering Marshall County sports for, not good at math, but close to 40 years. I started in 1993, so.
So let's start with where you were born.
Here, I was born in Plymouth, Indiana. Bill and Sybil Nixon were my parents. I was born at the old Parkview Hospital right across the street from the park. And the craziest thing is that my father was a very good pitcher in his day, and he had a game across the street at Centennial Park the day I was born. So he was up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning for me to be born, and then went across the street and pitched a ball game. It gets a little fuzzy there depending on who you talk to. My mother says he got shelled out in the first inning. He says he threw a complete game no-hitter. My grandmother kind of agrees with my mother. So, we don't know what actually happened, but whatever, he left my birthplace and went straight over across the street to pitch a ball game the same day. So baseball's kind of ingrained in our family a little bit.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
So you went to school around here. You played sports.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Played everything all the way up. In high school, played some basketball. Was on the baseball team for 4 years. Changed from basketball to swimming. I had a terrible shoulder injury as a freshman, and my doctor said if you swim, it's a good rehabilitation. And I wasn't, how shall I put this? Wasn't a 5-tool athlete as a basketball player. So I made the switch to swimming, basically so I could play baseball in the spring. And that ended up being a good decision. I left Plymouth with a couple of school records. I was team captain. They had only had a swim team for 3 or 4 years, so that doesn't say much. It was easy to get a school record, but that's what I did when I was in high school. I know that the 4 years we played a baseball, we won 4 straight sectional, or not sectional, but sectional too, but 4 straight conference championships. It was part of a 10-year period where we won the NLC conference. I was really proud of that. I'm not sure what our record was. I've been trying to, once again, I'm not good with math, but we won, I'm thinking somewhere in the neighborhood in my 4-year period there, over 110 games, but like 112, 113 games, and we only lost about 13. So it was a good stretch for Plymouth baseball, and Plymouth baseball's had a lot of good stretches, so it was something I was proud of to be part of.
So growing up, how was it to have a dad who was the coach of so you can talk a little bit about your dad. He's obviously a fixture in the Plymouth sports community.
Well, he won a lot of awards, but he told me many times the only one that really meant anything to him was when they voted him into the Indiana High School Baseball Hall of Fame. And he said the reason for that was because that was his peers. And that meant a lot to him that his fellow coaches thought that much of him. But he came close to 1,000 games, quit just shy of that. And when he retired, he was the second winningest coach in Indiana, the third winningest coach in the country, and Plymouth was number 10 in number of wins in the United States. So he had a pretty successful career. He was pretty either loved or hated. But the thing about him was, I remember when I was playing, we had a star pitcher who had a C on his report card. And even though the IHSAA says if you are passing, you're eligible, for my dad, if you didn't have a C or better, you weren't eligible. And he stayed with that. And we had a star guy who had a C, and so we had a team meeting. Everybody's got to tutor this guy. He's crazy enough. He'll do this. He'll suspend him. So all the things I used to hear in team meeting, we all hate him. And I'm like, hey guys, it's my dad. But I get it. And when people left, they understood he did what he did because he cared. They got it. And the crazy thing was, when I coached for him, the teams I coached, I would say, welcome to Plymouth baseball family. Because he treated every player, I can honestly say, he treated every single player he ever had like his own son. And I think anybody who played with me, that was obvious. He was harder on me than he was. I had a friend come up to me and said, man, I'm glad you're on the team this year. And I said, I'm thinking, oh yeah, because I'm such a good hitter. He said, no man, because he's too busy yelling at you to yell at me anymore. So, yeah, he treated everybody like his own child, and I think people, as I got older, they realized. And I remember him telling me a story that when nobody ever pushed him to do anything. He was a 20-point scorer in basketball. He played 2 Division I sports. He played basketball and baseball at Ball State. It's a story in itself. He had to guard Walt Bellamy one time in a basketball game, and my mom was in the stands taking bets on how many times he's going to be able to get up and down the floor without dying. He said, nobody ever pushed me. And he says, I'm not going to let that happen to any kid I coach. I'm going to push them to be what I think they can be. So the thing, my dad, if he didn't yell at you, was because you were already where he thought you could be. If he yelled at you, it was because he knew you could do better. And nobody ever did that to him until he got to college. And he told me the first week he was there, his coach calls him in, and he says, I went in there, and the only question in high school I ever had was, am I going to throw a no-hitter or not? I got to college, and there were 10 guys on that pitching staff that were better than me. And my coach calls me in after a week and says, son, if you don't want to be here, pack and go home. He says, that was an eye-opener for me because nobody ever said that to me before. And he ended his college career for 2 years. He was the leading, he had the lowest ERA in the country, and he credits that to his college coach who pushed him to do that. And he made up his mind when he became a coach, that's how he was going to be. And so that's the way he was, and you could take him or leave him, but he was honest. So that was the bottom line.
Did you feel a lot of pressure as a?
No, I didn't. And the reason was because he was different at home. He didn't care what I did on the field. Now, he pushed me, but on the field he was Coach Nixon, and at home he was Dad. And I was able to make that. I'm schizophrenic enough that I was able to make that delineation in my head. I knew that guy yelling at me on the field, and oh my God, he yelled at me so hard, my mom used to have to leave games. I remember one game, my mom's sitting right by the fence, and he just lays into me, and she just gets up and leaves. But to me, that was Coach Nixon yelling at me. He wanted me to be better. When we got home later that night, we're watching television together, just joking, having a fun. He's my best friend to this day. And, that was a good bonding experience for us, but I was able to separate that. He was trying to push me to be better, and I got it. But when he was home, he was Dad, and he was just as good a dad as he was a coach, in my mind. So, that's the way it was.
So how do you think his legacy in the community has impacted the community as far as?
Nobody will ever get away with what he got away with anymore. He had a certain style. I think his legacy is of anybody who played for him, there's no question that he cared about every single one of his players. I think the legacy he leaves behind is somebody who demanded excellence from people who could. And honestly, he was not, if you were not capable of playing that level, he wasn't the same. He would treat everybody differently based on who they were, what he felt they could handle. We had a great player that played for me in my years. He understood if he ever got on him, he'd just fold like a house of cards. So he kind of left him alone. He let him do his own thing. But I think his legacy will be one of he cared. I mean, honestly, and I don't think anybody that ever played for him was around him, and not about winning and losing. He cared about everybody who played for him. Told the story at his last roast when I was a kid, and not even junior high age. One of his players got in trouble, big trouble, and 3 o'clock in the morning we get a phone call from a jail in another town. And I remember my dad answering the phone, and they talk, and he says, "You're telling me the truth." All I heard was his side of the conversation, obviously. He says, "You're telling me the truth." He says, "Okay, I'll do whatever I can to help you, but if you aren't telling me the truth, you better hope they put you in jail, because I'm going to come looking for you." And that was the kind of guy he was. If you were honest with him, he'd do anything in the world for you. But, and so, and in my mind, that guy got it. The guy that used his one phone call to call my dad got it. He knew that was a guy who cared about him. That was the one guy who cared about him in his life. And as far, I never heard anything else about it. I was too young to be talked to about things like that. But as far as I know, he did all he could for that guy. And things turned out well, as I understand. But once again, it's secondhand. But I just always remember that was, his players got it. They understood he'd do anything for them, and he did.
So when you were playing for him, did you guys? I know he won championships, right?
Oh, a lot of them. Yeah.
What in your playing days, as far as like what stands out for you, like game wise? Like, is there something that?
That's tough, because when I started coaching, the thing I would tell my kids is that when this is, don't miss any of this. Savor every moment of it. Because when I was playing, I don't remember a play in a game. I don't remember the score of a game. I don't remember any of that. Nothing that happened at game time. But I remember every Tuesday, 6 or 7 of us would go to the A&W and see how many coney dogs we could eat, because it was coney dog day. And they were a dime, so we would eat as many. I remember riding to practice with guys and, all the crazy stuff we do. I remember going out with them, and in those days you cruised in Plymouth, and we would do that. I remember everything that I did with my friends on the team. I don't remember anything about the games. And I would try to make that clear to my players. Look, how you play is important to you, and how you play this game is great. Number one, love playing it or get out. No, and that was something Dad always told me when I decided I didn't want to play basketball anymore. He was like, "You having fun? No, then don't play anymore." Have fun at what you're doing and love what you're doing, but the things you're going to remember involve your teammates and not the game or your play or anything else. And I still think that's true. I still think it's true today. Things you remember are things you did with the guys you played with. And, when I was playing, I felt my own pressure because I wanted to do well. But he didn't put any extra on me. And once again, the things I remember about playing were crazy stuff I did with my fellow teammates. So that's what I remember.
So a lot of people have talked about that '82 championship basketball team. What do you remember from that?
I remember that was my brother's graduation year. And I remember Scott Skiles played with us. And, I'm sure there's a lot of Scott Skiles stories that have come up. But the thing I remember about him, I probably shouldn't go into. I'm not going to tell that story because that's one that needs to stay in the dugout. But I played baseball with him for 2 or 3 years. He and my brother both were on the team. They were both the same age, and I remember, number one, that he was a baseball guy. In my mind, he was a better baseball player than he was a basketball player. I mean, he was. I can't imagine anybody who would have had a better career at third base than Scott. I mean, he was he played shortstop for us, but his skills, he could have made the big leagues as a third baseman. He was a great hitter, still holds a high school record. I think he hit, my God, 6 home runs in a row in at-bats, and went over 2 games, but I can't remember the exact number, but it was it's still in the record book. But what I remember about him, since my contact with him was with baseball, was that I can understand why people didn't like him if they were on another team. He was good, and he let people know he was good. But as a teammate, you would definitely go to battle for him. And I remember a couple of times people would take cheap shots at him or throw at him or whatever, and I don't want to go too much in depth, but we'd protect him.
You know, anything out if you want, so feel free to share.
He played first base. See, there was a rotation going on, and this is why in baseball we had a lot of great players, and he was one of them. Tim Trump was another. Mike Height was another. I played with all those guys, and Ken Fox was another, and we were all good hitters. I wasn't quite as good a defensive player as the rest of them, so we got into this rotation. They would play all the time, but I would rotate with Ken and Scott, and they might get a day off, or they might play for whatever, but we would rotate between DH, first base, and second base. He's playing first base one day at New Prairie, and some kid cuts his legs because he goes up to catch a ball that was high, and some kid cuts his legs and he lands on his head. The kid didn't have a fun time going around the bases. Number one, he goes to second, and I'm not going to say who, but somebody had a tendency to just kind of conveniently trip and knock a guy down, and then the other guy's job was to pretend he was going to catch the ball and kind of land on the guy with his spikes. And then our third baseman believed that a tag should leave a mark. So, and the funny thing was he was going to score. There was a base hit. He goes around third. Our third baseman literally stuck his leg out and just threw the kid over his leg. Umpires are watching the hit. They don't see that. Their coach goes crazy, as he should. Next time the guy comes to the plate, our pitchers were pretty good. And if you did anything to anybody on our team, they had a tendency to be able to hit you where they wanted to hit you. So he came up the next 2 times and went to first base free. But, we took care of each other. And there was nothing malicious, but that was the way you played the game in those days. I mean, I can remember playing a couple of teams, and they wouldn't. I was second baseman. They wouldn't take me out on a double play. I mean, they'd miss me, and I'm like, "You're insulting me. You're just telling me go ahead and throw. And the guys that would just kill me, knock me over, whatever." I was the first one to reach down and say, "Nice play. That's exactly what you're supposed to do." We expected it. We practiced it. We did it, and today I think I don't know that they should do that in high school, but, to me, that was part of the game. If somebody came in and took me out, I expected that to happen. That was the way you were supposed to do it. And I would, like I said, "Hey, nice play. You did a good job." But I don't know. We took care of Scott, and that didn't surprise me. I don't know if it's, once again, I'm going on. My father, the next year I was gone. He had Scott in the batting cage for baseball. And I know the Hardin kid from Valpo had won Mr. Basketball, and he was in second place. And I know that my dad came up and he says, "How do you feel about that, man? You were, weren't you Mr. Basketball?" And he showed his ring and said, "Does he have one of those?" And so, that was Scott. I mean, he didn't care what happened as long as you won. And he wasn't that arrogant guy. I know they said in the huddle, he said, "Get me the ball." But everybody would, because he wasn't somebody who he never said, "You can't do it, but I know I'm going to do it." And so you believed him. That confidence. And he had confidence in everybody on that team, and he let you know that. But, he'd come in and like, "Man, I know I'm going to do it. I'm not saying none of you guys can, but I know I can." So, and you protected that guy. He was a good teammate. He was somebody you wanted to play with because he was a winner and he did things the way you should do them. So, there's a lot of other things that went on outside that I won't talk about. But yeah, he was one of those guys that, even though sometimes you got mad at him, you still protected him.
I talked to Bill Snyder. He came in and he told a funny story too. He's like, "I probably shouldn't tell this."
You got a lot of, "I probably shouldn't tell this," as I'm sure.
Yeah. But no, it was pretty funny too. I think he used to take his team on a canoe trip, and
right.
There was one where Scott was kind of mouthing off to him.
But you see, that was Scott. You had to get to the point, and he would mouth off to us on the baseball field, and he would pay the price for mouthing off. But it was still one of those things that was handled on the team, and he dealt with it. You didn't think any less of him. It was just, it's part of being a teammate, and that was who he was. You accepted that. It's not that you liked it or didn't retaliate, but at the same time, and he was cool with that too. He understood that was part of that interaction.
Yeah. Were you at the championship game?
No, I watched it on TV.
So what was your experience of that? Do you remember how?
I remember I didn't have to watch it on TV, but I tuned it in anyway. I was home for the weekend. I was going to Indiana University, I wanted us to win. And honestly, there's a lot of people that say that shot curves. I knew it was going in. And I thought it curved too, but the minute it left his hand, I'm like, I don't care where he shot that, it's going in because of Scott. So, from my point of view, watching the television, he missed when it left his hand, but I remember thinking, it's going in. I don't care if he throws it in third row to the stands, it's going in because it's Scott, and he believes it's going in. So, he was going, no matter where that came out of his hand, he was going to will it into the basket. And that was the kind of player he was. I mean, anything that it took.
So you went on to, did you play sports in college then?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I wasn't good enough. Quite frankly, I was not. I went to Indiana University. I went out for baseball for 2 days. Walked up to the coach and said, "I'm wasting your time." And he says, "Yes, you are." And so I left. So, yeah, I was not. I was good, but I wasn't that good. Nowadays, I probably would have been able to play. There's a lot more opportunities for players, but back in those days, it wasn't there. And I was at a Division I school, and I was a borderline player at Plymouth, although I feel like I was better than they think I was. But no, there was no way, and I went out just because I wanted to keep playing, but I wasn't even close to good enough to play college ball.
So then after, did you study like journalism or?
No, it's really crazy. I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. I changed majors every year for 4 years. I think I was a chemistry major one year. I was a communications major one year. I was a theater major for 1 year. I mean, it was one of those things where, you know, me and my best friend Bert were both the same way. We couldn't figure out what we wanted. There were so many things we were interested in. We couldn't figure out what we wanted to do.
It's hard to decide.
Yeah, it is.
19, 20.
And I was offered a job at a radio station in South Bend. I took it. Stayed in that for probably the better part of 8 or 10 years after I got out of school.
Any memorable games that you covered during that time?
The only thing I can remember is that I had the privilege of covering Northwood. That was my first job out of college, was to cover Northwood football. And Jim Andrews was still the coach. And I just remember, you know, all the accolades that he's gotten since his tragic death a number of years ago were unbelievably deserved. Number one, I never met anybody who didn't universally love him. And then me, as a 20-whatever kid coming out of college, you know, I had complete access to him. You know, he would invite me to come to his team meetings or his classroom if I needed to talk to him. I mean, anything I wanted, he was right there for me. And, you know, I have an enormous amount of really great memories of working with him. Just a wonderful man. And I think it's interesting that his son is now the head coach over there. So, yeah, he was one of those special guys that just, and his only interest was, once again, was his players. You know, he cared about them like his own kids. So, but yeah, he was really gracious to me.
So then you moved there from South Bend to
here.
Pilot?
Yeah, I came to the Pilot News.
So you covered sports in Marshall County for
forever.
A long time.
Yeah, 93 to today. So yeah, I've been here a long time. I don't know if that's good or bad, but yeah, I've been here a long time.
So you know, what's it like to kind of follow a team that you kind of have the idea that they've got something special to them, like they're, you know, there might be.
You get one thing that I always wanted to bring when I started working at the Pilot was to assign writers to teams. We had people on Bremen or people on Triton or whatever, and my hope was that you get a special insight when you're with a team every day, when you're on them every game. You talk to them during the week. There's something you get that people want to read or hear. They want to know what's going on. That becomes a kind of a tricky thing at times because you don't want to be too intrusive, but at the same time you want to give people a story. I've always kind of let the person who was on them deal with that team. I have been, I don't want to say tied, but you know, because of my position and whatever, I've been with Plymouth most of the time. But you know, I think that's essential when you cover somebody, whether it's radio, whether it's newspaper, whatever it is, to be there all the time. Because you gain, and I'm not saying you become a part of the team, because that's not what it is, but you gain an insight where if something happens, somebody else looks at that and says, what was that? And if you've been with them all the time, you know exactly what it was. So, you know, I've kind of hoped that people would, that I've assigned would gain that level of, and the other part of it is level of trust. I mean, a coach needs to know you're not going to, he can say whatever he wants, you're not going to take him out of context, you're not going to say something you shouldn't. There was a time where I was working as a freelancer for the South Bend Tribune, and I'm not going to mention teams or game, but there was a game where I went up to talk to one of the coaches, and he looked at me and said, look, Rusty, listen, I'm emotional right now, and I don't want to say something I shouldn't, so is it okay if I just don't say anything? And I'm like, you're cool, man, whatever with me. I get it. I've coached, I've played, I know what you're going through right now, and if you talk, and this is in my head, if you talk, you might say something that you regret. So I get it. Cool. Sent the story in, they send me an email back saying, why didn't you quote that coach? And I said, because he felt like he was going to say something out of line, and I gave him the courtesy of letting him not speak. And so then the story comes out, and they added, and so-and-so refused comment. And to me, he didn't refuse comment. He was trying. You see what I'm saying? And so that's something that I like to allow our writers the opportunity. If they go to somebody and they say, look, I'm emotional, and no coach gets involved because they're not competitive. And they, in the heat of battle, when it's over with, if something happens, maybe they might say something out of line and not mean it. It happens with all of us. We get emotional, we say something out of line. Oh, I wish I hadn't said that. And so, if you're with that team all the time, when that coach is in that situation. So I'd really like to let them have space, and if that's what they want. But like I say, if you're not with them all the time, you don't know that. So I've kind of tried to do that whenever we can, is let a person stay with a team and cover them all the way through so they get the dynamics of what's going on with that team.
So any coaches that kind of stand out to you over your time covering the
my dad.
Wait. Did you have to interview?
Oh, yeah.
How did that go?
That was funny, because he would look at me and say, you know what I'm going to say, just write it down. But he gave me one of the greatest leads I ever had. He made the comment after a baseball game one time, if our hitting were a city, it would have been declared a disaster area by now, and we'd be receiving federal aid. So, he was always good for that kind of a quote. But yeah, I got to cover my father. Tom Condon was another one, and honestly, with Tom, it was more than just as a coach. He gave me a great quote one time too. They had just gotten their rear end handed to them, and he says, it was a rough year, and they just won a few games in a row, and they were coming. And he says, every now and then you think you see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you get there, and it's just a big old gorilla with a flashlight. And that was I quoted him on that. But him more than just as a coach, as a young coach myself at that time, I always marveled at the fact he was so calm on the sideline. Football coaches are not normally calm. He was always very level and calm. And I said, how do you do that? And he says, look, if a kid screws up, he knows he screwed up, his parents knows he screwed up, the team knows he screwed up, I know he screwed up, the assistant coaches know he screwed up, the other team knows he screwed up, everybody that's here knows he screwed up. If he comes to the sideline and I yell that you screwed up, I'm not giving him new information. He knows it. He says, I'm going to need that kid later in the game. I can't, I got to pat him on the head and say, you got another play. And so that's the way I do things. Now in practice, it might not be the same reaction, but in a ball game, I can't have him thinking about screwing up. I got to have him thinking about the next play. And at that point, I was one of those coaches who jumped up and down and yelled a lot. And from that point on, I'm like, he's 100% right. If I expect them to be calm and focused, I got to be calm and focused. And so he taught me a lot as a coach. Jack Edison was always interesting to interview. And the thing with him is, because he was a family friend and I'd known him since I was 5 years old, I think he probably told me things he didn't tell to other people, which I think it made me feel good, but I think it gave some insight into him that people wouldn't have normally had. Trying to think Marty Huber was so much fun. At Bremen. I remember one time he looked at me writing down what he was saying. He goes, how are you going to read that when you get back? And I just looked at him, I'm just going to make it all up anyway. So, and he laughed. And, once again, I think that his brother was my dad's catcher at Ball State when they were there together. So there was a certain, and he was a student teacher at Plymouth my junior year, so I knew him from that. And once again, that trust gave me a certain insight into them that I don't think he normally would have given somebody. But yeah, he was fun. It's hard for me. Gordon Mawson was always fun because he was so candid and honest, and that you don't always get that. You know, and I think it's a trust you build up with folks over the years that you're not going to do something they don't, you know, that's going to be wrong. But man, so many, and I've always said all kinds of times when it comes to coaches in Marshall County, we got to feel lucky, because I don't think I've ever dealt with anybody that I didn't know by the way they talked to me that their main focus was how much they cared about their team. I don't know that that's the case everywhere. You know, they weren't always great coaches. They were who they were, but you could tell just by the way they dealt with you that their first concern was how much they cared about the kids on their team, and that they saw it as an educational experience, not a athletic thing. It was an extension of the classroom. You get taught all these things in the classroom. The way we make it come to life for you people is right here. And I've never dealt with a coach that I didn't feel had that really solidly in everything they did. And that's what, 30 years? So I think we've been really lucky here in Marshall County to have people like that coaching our kids. I know a lot of times people, they don't win enough and people get upset, but you know, Gary Hudson was always fun at Bremen as a basketball coach. I never forget, they were expanding the NBA, and it was after I'd talked to him about something else, and we're just sitting around his office, and he said, "Where do you think they're going to put teams?" I said, "I don't know. Where do you think?" And he says, "I think they're going to put 2 teams right here in Marshall County. Just listen to our parents. They could just stock them with kids out of Marshall County." So, you know, funny, you know, stuff like that was just hilarious. Obviously that was off the record, but yeah, you know, we've had a lot of coaches over the years that cared a lot about their kids and not a whole lot about anything else. And I think we're extremely lucky at all the schools around here.
One of the themes that I've heard from the coaches who've retired is that they don't necessarily miss the practices or the games, but they miss having that relationship with these kids and guiding them. And so I've been really just blown away by, you know, how much they really do care. It's just obvious. You know?
My dad made the comment, you know, he was offered a job with the Atlanta Braves when he went to Florida to retire. The Braves wanted him to run their single A team just down the road from him at Orlando. And he said no. And I called him, he told me that, and I said, "Well, do they care what's Nixon? Because I'll come down there and do it." But he said, "Look, if I wanted to still coach, I'd be in Plymouth still." He says, I hate the bus rides, I hate the games, because it's, you know, there comes a point where wins don't mean anything anymore. You've already gotten to that, whatever it is, and it's like, it doesn't matter anymore. It becomes about playing the perfect game. He says, "I hated bus rides, I hated games, I hated everything about all that." He says, "What I miss is that one-on-one with kids, teaching them, being with them, talking to them." And that's what I honestly, he never told me this, but I honestly believe that kept him in coaching for 10 more years, was just how much he enjoyed being with his team and teaching them in practice. The thing he misses to this day is practice. And that's because he got a chance to work with the kids individually. So
when you started coaching, did you kind of take that from how? Okay, one of the fun things has been to ask coaches about their first year coaching. because it doesn't always go the way that they thought it would. How was your experience?
Well, I had Tony Plotho with me, so it was crazy. We had fun, but you know, we had the best boss in the world to work for, which was my dad. And it's like when I went into his office, I go, "Okay, what do you expect of me?" He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "How many wins and losses do you want? I mean, how many do we have to win?" And he says, "I don't give up about wins and losses." He says, "I need a shortstop, I need 2 pitchers, and I need a catcher in every class. Your job is to find those guys and develop them. And everybody else, get them on the field as much as you can get them on the field." And I'll never forget this. He said to me very clearly, "Nobody gets better sitting and watching somebody else play. So get those guys on the field, get them as much time as you can, and those other 4, develop them. I don't care how many games you win. I don't care anything else. That's what I need for you to do." And so that's what we did. I mean, you know, there was never any pressure to win. Now, when we had the parents' meetings and everything else, he said, "I think I'm going to have to fire my JV coach and his assistant because they aren't winning enough games." You know, and that was just a joke with us. But, yeah, that's what he wanted out of his under guys. And then when I came up to work with him, all he wanted me to do was go out there, and I was a good coach. He'd do the screaming. It was my job to put my arm around him. "Okay, now you understand he cares about you, and he's saying this because he wants you to be better." Yeah, I was good coach. He was bad coach, and that was how that worked. But you know, it shocked me when I came back to town. He asked me to come coach with him, and I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And he says, "I want you to coach our younger pitchers." I've never pitched a game in my life. I've never thrown a pitch in a ball game ever. I said, "Are you sure about that?" He goes, "Yeah." He says, "Why were you a good hitter?" I said, "Well, because I studied pitchers. I listened to every word you said to our pitchers, and I outthought them." "Exactly. That's what I want." He says, "I can't explain to the younger guys what I want because I did it. You didn't do it. You got to think about it and figure out how to explain it to them. That's much better than what I'm going to give them. So when they get to me, all I got to talk about with them is, how do you get a hitter out? How do you pitch this guy? You see this, what do you go after?" He said, "I don't have to worry about where your hand's supposed to be. Are you coming to balance? Are you doing," you know, so yeah, that was an experience. I mean, you know, you want me to coach pitchers? I mean, you know, but yeah, that was my introduction. And then when Tony took over, he didn't leave the cupboard bare. We had a lot of great players, and that was a fun run. But you know, during that period, he went to the Final Four, my dad, his last year, and then I think we went 3 out of the next 4 years. I mean, we never won one, but we were there for a long time. And we did something that no other team has done. We went undefeated in the NLC. Undefeated in the NLC, I think, for 4 years. Not sure, I think it was 52 straight games without losing one. And the only team I know that's ever come close to that I'm aware of is Bremen's softball team, when they won 56 or whatever it was in their conference. So kind of proud of that too. I mean, nobody will ever break that, I don't think. Could be wrong, but we went a long time without, and that went back once again to my dad's last year. We lost our first conference game his last year to Concord by 1 run. I think it was 2-1, and we didn't lose another conference game until 2000 something. So, you know, I'm kind of proud of that string too, because that's a tough conference.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So I've asked everybody, I just want to make sure that we have enough time. I've asked everybody at the end, if you look back over your life and career, and what do you think that sports, what the impact has it had on your life?
On my life?
Yeah.
That's a tough one because, you know, I don't think people understand. My grandfather was a coach too. So it goes back 4 or 5 generations. I think relationships. I got a lot of players that keep in touch with me. I coached at Ancilla for a number of years. Those guys got to know my kids. They still come back to see my kids. I think that it kind of surprises me that I meant enough to somebody in their formative years to have them come back and say, let's have dinner, let's do this. Because that's what I remember as the coaches. The only reason I got in was to pay back people like Mike Pettibone and Ike Dahl and my dad and people who invested time in me. And I got involved because I felt like I owed that back because they meant a lot to me. Teaching me how to be a man, basically. And I remember when I got to Ancilla, Gene Reese asked me, he goes, "What do you need for the bullpen?" Because I was a pitching coach. I said, "A couch." He says, "Couch?" I said, "Yeah, I'm not a pitching coach. I'm a psychiatrist." And, and I remember Russ Teal asking me when his kid was playing for me, he says, "Those guys spend an awful lot of time with you down in the bullpen. What are they talking about?" I said, "You." So, they would come down to me to work on pitching, but they talked about everything. They weren't getting grades. How do I do that? And my feeling was helping them through those problems was more important than teaching them to keep their fingers on top of the ball, or how to pull their curveball down out in front of them. That was what meant something to me, was when they felt comfortable enough to come to me with, my dad yells at me all the time. Well, you understand why. I'm having trouble getting grades, or I'm having trouble with this professor, or I'm having trouble with this. Having the confidence to ask me about that, and then taking that advice and making it work for them. So I gotta say that relationships, even as a player, like I said before, I remember everything we did together as a team. I don't remember any games or plays. But I think it's about relationships. And to be honest with you, I think that's getting lost. I think that's the thing we're losing in sports now. It's about winning. It's about my experience, not my experience with my team. It's about what my parents get out of this. And I feel like it's changing drastically. Quite frankly, I don't like the change, because that's not what it was about when I was playing. It was about learning how to be a man, learning how to deal with people. My kids would come to me constantly and say, this coach is a blah, 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 blah. They're having trouble. And I said, "Is he touching you improperly?" "No." "Is he asking you to do something that you know is morally wrong?" "No." "Good luck. You're on your own. You come to me when you're 30 and tell me, 'Oh, my boss isn't being fair to me,' blah, 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 blah." You want me to go in and say, "Hey, you aren't being fair to my son. He needs the good clients." No, you got to learn how to deal with people you don't like and function in that situation. Teammates, you don't have to like everybody, but you got to work together for that goal. Those are things you need to know to live as an adult. And my kids knew they weren't going to get any sympathy from me if something was going on they didn't like. They had to deal with it. And, I don't think that's the case anymore. If they come home, they say, "I'm not getting what I want," you're in meetings with principals and athletic directors and coaches and everybody else because I'm not getting what I want. Well, is he touching you wrong? Is he asking you to do something immoral? Then I guess maybe you ought to learn how to function with this person, because you're not always going to like your boss. You're not always going to like your coworkers. You're not always going to like everybody in your life, but you have to deal with them. And we don't learn to deal with people as human beings anymore because we're not asked to. We're asked to get what we want. And
you think sports helps with that?
I think it did when I was involved. I'm not so sure anymore. But that's my personal opinion. I think it's going the other way, and it makes me frightened, because it makes me frightened of what we're developing. Because I think sports, when I was involved, Bill Nixon could never survive today. He would be in jail, probably. To a great extent, I would have trouble surviving, because I tend to be a little bit too honest, and people don't like that. But I'm afraid of where it's going. I think it's going to be a loss of an enormous teaching tool if it does happen that way. And I think parents got to understand that it's not about your status. It's not about your kid's experience. It's about being part of something that's bigger than you, and learning to function as an adult in an adult world. And honestly, you asked me before about what I took away from coaching or whatever. It was and it goes back to Tom Condon again. He told me one time, he said, am I coaching any pros? Probably not. He says, in my career here, if I stay here 25 years, if I'm lucky, I might coach one guy that played pro ball, but probably not even the one. But everybody I coach is going to be a father. Everybody I coach is going to be an employee. Everybody I coach will probably have kids. My job is to teach them how to be a father, how to be an employee, show up for work every day, how to treat your kids right. He says, that's my job, not to make pro athletes. And I think today people are sold this bill of goods that every kid in the world is going to be a pro athlete. Think about it. How long have I been here? 40 years? You include my time in high school, at least 40 years. Seen one pro. One Scott Skiles in 40 years in the county. There have been other guys who've had a cup of coffee. I coached a couple of guys who played single A ball. Never got past that. One guy actually made a living playing sports in 40 years in this county. That's the realistic point of view. And everybody thinks my kid's going to be the one. Do the math. I'm not a math guy, but do the math. Yeah. It's just, be realistic. Let them get the lessons that they need out of it, and stay out of the way.